Great. Well, welcome to our Women in Leadership Roundtable. Delighted to have the three of you here, our first in Women in Leadership Roundtable. Hopefully a series that we can go on. It's certainly a topic that's close to my heart, something I'm very passionate about, and whether it's in business or in sport, really looking to support the development of women to really achieve whatever their dreams are. And we've got some amazing people here today to share their stories. And I'll get you to introduce yourselves very shortly as we go. But the topic is very much around how do we harness the power of advocacy? And what you'll see is that often the way society and systems and structures are set up, then actually men get a lot more natural advocacy built into their everyday worlds, and it's sort of set up by default for them. Whereas oftentimes we need to be much more purposeful around how we create advocacy for women and their progression. And I think we've got some great stories here about advocacy in the form not just of mentoring, but in sponsorship has really made a difference. And if we put much more of a focus on that, we can achieve sort of much greater sense of equity in the workplace. Open the floor to you.
Hi, so my name is Claira Singh. I am a diversity and inclusion manager at Wickes, the DIY company. I've actually only been in role a couple of weeks, but I've been with Wickes for about 5 years as a HR business partner. And I was asked to join because we've been on quite a big journey with our diversity and inclusion strategy across the business, and it started with women in leadership. So we started with focusing on a group of women and seeing what journey they wanted to go on, and they really helped drive the whole program for us. So it's something I'm really passionate about.
So originally I sort of worked with some of our Olympians in sort of GB rowing team, in British skeleton, in pentathlon GB. I've worked with some professional female footballers. I'm currently working in a men's game, and at the moment I work with obviously professionals. I line manage full-time, part-time placement students, hopefully with a nice emphasis on a diverse and inclusive workforce.
Hi everyone, I'm Nigyar. I am Chief Growth Officer of Danone, and I am non-executive member of the board for biotech company named Flower. Both companies are incredibly focused on driving inclusion and diversity, and I believe making it as part of their DNA and making a good progress. But the reason I am here, because above and beyond my job, I am a mother of 2 girls, and I am grandmother of a girl. So the reason why I want to be part of this conversation, because I want to shape the future where the generation of my children and my granddaughter generation will not need to have these conversations, because the diversity will come as given to them.
Maybe Nick, if I just pass over to you, start with you again. When you think about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, what stands out to you and how has that maybe supported you on your journey?
Yes, good question, Sarah. I think first there is a huge difference, even in definitions, between mentorship and sponsorship. But if I just leave the definitions to Wikipedia and just share my personal experience, I think the mentor with me, and I always had both great mentors and great sponsors, mostly men. But the difference is that mentors are helping you to find solutions. They are really, they are asking you good questions, and they are finding and sort of helping you to navigate. Sponsors are unconditionally by your side. Sponsors are people which make sure that your name gets mentioned in a positive way in the important conversations. Sponsors are always keeping you on top of their mind, and they always think of you and your interest and how to help you to advance. And they are not doing it when there is a mentorship conversation in the diary, because the mentorship to me becomes, it's more discreet and discretional, rather than sponsorship, which is a continuous journey and a much more in personal involvement journey as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the research shows that women have a lot of mentors, but actually when it comes to sponsors, that's where they often lack. There isn't somebody in that decision-making table saying, hey, have you thought about Sarah? You know, have you thought about Clara? And that's often the difference that can be made. And so we actually have to purposefully build those and actually become better at being able to navigate those scenarios. And we may be lucky enough that we land with great line managers and people we work with who already automatically are just brilliant at sponsoring you. And I know, Clara, you've had your own experiences in this area. I'd love you to share those.
I have, yeah. So I've been really lucky in that I've fallen into having an amazing sponsor. So when I started at Wickes, I started by business partnering from a HR perspective, my distribution director. And he is an amazing advocate in that I know that if he was ever in a board meeting or if he was in a senior leadership discussion and they were talking about a project or an activity or an opportunity, he was the first person to raise my name and give me that encouragement to speak up. So I know that I've been in meetings with board directors where I'd have an opinion, but I'd maybe not be confident enough to share it. And he would always have had a discussion with me over the course of the week or the day before where we talk about whatever the topic was. So he knew I knew my stuff and I was confident. And then when we were in the room, sometimes I'd know and sometimes I wouldn't. And he would just ask what my opinion was. And it was an opportunity for me to confidently speak in front of more senior people, for them to hear my voice and to get to know who I was. But he would also be doing that behind the scenes as well, really championing me. And he's always, I've business partnered him for periods of time, and then I've gone long periods where we haven't worked together closely, but he's always still been that sponsor, been putting my name forward. And I think that's really important. I think that is the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, is they're not getting anything back from it, but they make sure that you're the person that that they're backing in the room.
Yeah, certainly. I think that I suppose my awareness grew out of work, like being really fortunate that I worked with some amazing female leaders, amazing talented people within their field, in a supportive position where I was seen as the position of leadership. Like my role was therefore to support these people to grow and be the best they can be. And sort of as that sort of went through time, I kind of, like, you recognise in certainly in strength and conditioning, for example, as you raise it, that you look back and you see a male-dominated field, and fortunately over time there's been a sort of evolution and a growth in numbers. There's more and more female practitioners, female coaches that sort of enter in the profession, and I suppose just sort of becoming aware of it over time. I suppose somehow informally educated, and sort of being open and aware helped me to sort of make better decisions and sort of have an awareness of what's going on. So I suppose my conscious mind was prodded by, sorry, I'm having some internet troubles here, so I keep flicking in and out, but and I suppose my experiences in that led me to sort of make better decisions. So I know I take without being really prompted or without anything really making it happen, I take a keen awareness in when we're looking at shortlisting candidates for roles, or paying attention to who's applied for roles and making sure that, like, there's a representative shortlist, and not being influenced by what you would typically see through generations of bias.
And I was really interested around the idea of us being more purposeful around sponsoring. How do we, because you could be lucky, you land a great sponsor, or you land in a great situation where you've got an open-minded person, in decision maker like James in his role. But Nicky, if you were to give people advice around how to, I suppose, cultivate sponsors, what advice would you give people in this area?
I was actually listening to Claire, and I was thinking that very important to make sure that you don't have just one sponsor, because having just one sponsor makes you overly dependent on that one person in the organization. It's very important to build the network of sponsors, because they will be involved in different conversations, they will be in different rooms, and it's important that you stay top of mind. The way to cultivate, I'm convinced, first and foremost, to deliver results. People do not want to in the jobs what you do, or in the sports what James was talking. I mean, look, he started by saying I was working with amazing, talented people. So delivering in whatever you do and doing it best, that's number one, I think, condition for securing strong sponsorship. The second one is just delivering is not enough. It's very important that you also make sure that people know what you are delivering, what your contributions are, and people also know what are your ambitions, because you want to be sponsored towards the ambition which you want to have. Because we all are very different people, and we may have very different ambitions, and we want to be mentioned in relevant conversations and for relevant jobs. So speaking up and proactively asking for sponsorship and having this one-to-one conversation, I think that's another very important element for securing the good sponsor network in any organization we happen to be.
Brilliant, thank you. And Claira, you talked about, actually, as part of, I think, what was it, your coaching for modern leadership, that you actually had some training in this arena around actually how do you create your stakeholder network. Do you want to just share some of your experiences? Because I think a lot of people, it's just hit and miss rather than being intentional and understanding that this is a strategy that you put in place to advance your own career and the people around you.
Yeah, so we've done a number of different programs over the years. Originally, we had a program called Women of the Future, which was purely aimed at women. And then we've been on a journey in Wickes. So we've now got a work stream, an employee group called Balance for Better. So we moved to coaching for modern leadership, and that's open to everybody. And there is a module on there about getting a great sponsor. And it is about how to engage in that conversation. So asking people just to spend some time with them, you know, before COVID, that could be anything from just grabbing a coffee and having a chat about what your ambitions are, what it is you want from them, but being explicit. So we would give hints and tips for that conversation around, ask them outright, can they be your sponsor, and what do you mean by that? So is it a sponsorship in pay discussions or opportunities for projects or new roles, and actually giving them the skills that to ask the question and be resilient if you get knocked back, because it's better to ask someone to be your sponsor and for them to say no and understand why they've said no, than to just hope that somebody's going to back you for the right reasons. So we were really cautious with giving people those skills to say it's okay if someone says no, but ask them why they're not comfortable. And if it's because they've not had enough exposure to you, or they don't understand what your work ethic is, or they haven't seen enough that you've produced, then get to a point where you can either show them that, or you pick a sponsor that's a little bit closer to you who can really back you. But we've really encouraged people to push forward and outright ask for it.
As well, that, you know, you talked about this being in the DNA of your company, and thinking as well. I know, Claira, you talked around actually this has board level support, because actually you can have it sort of grassroots up, which is really important, but you need that sort of level of this is important. And I know obviously within football, they're elevating the women's game is a major part of this as well. So setting the intent, I think, seems to be something that's really important as part of this. How do you, Nigyar, how do you go around, how do you sort of start shaping a business where actually this becomes part of the DNA?
Before I go and answer your question, I just wanted to share one example where it is from Danone, so which is close to the sports as well. So for 20 years, Danone is sponsoring a world championship in football for children. I think it's age 12 to 14. And it's called Danone Nations Cup. So if you Google afterwards Danone Nations Cup, you will get a lot of information. And for many years, it was a championship for boys only. There were no teams of girls playing this football. And by the way, it was very impactful. I'll give you one example. Indonesian team, national team, 80% of the players in that national teams are the graduates of the Danone National Cup. So they were seen by coaches as children playing, and they were, I don't know, headhunted, I don't know, leg hunted probably, so recruited. And given the opportunity to become a professional footballers, but not the girls. And 5 years ago, the CEO of Danone, who is a true champion of the inclusion and diversity and true champion of female advancement, he insisted that Danone started sponsoring same kind of championship for girls. And I only joined Danone just a bit over a year. And it was my first experience last year for the Danone Nations Cup finals with girls and boys teams playing. And I can tell you, it was much more emotional actually, and much more engaging to see boys and girls, doing their games, and they were just brilliant. And it's a good example where we can advance even understanding of how important it is to create equal opportunities for both genders on such a small example of one company doing this event for many years and really believing in it. And the reason I am sharing this example, because to me it's a good one to illustrate that it has to start with a very strongly embedded belief of the leadership, and in this particular case of the CEO, who then makes it happen in the company. And we know in the company that if we present a plan of the recruitment, or if we share anything, if it's not reflecting the true inclusion and diversity, we will be pushed back. He will ask questions. He will not let it go until there is a clear balance between the two. So it starts from the top, but it also sets then the behavior code for the rest of the organization, because it becomes a norm for people to think about it, because you will be asked anyway, so you better get prepared before. And then gradually it gets into the habit. And then you start seeing the benefits. So therefore, it starts becoming a big driver of the growth and of the engagement within the company. So it becomes a part of the DNA as well.
And James, when you think about your world of football and obviously strength and conditioning, what are some of the changes that you've seen that's looking to address that balance and elevate women within football and within your field of practice?
Well, certainly, like the emphasis placed on the women's game right now is progressive, again, fortunate enough to have worked within the women's game. What you typically see is young girls in what they would call regional talent clubs. It's like the equivalent of the boys' academies, starting in the game with less exposure to having played football at a young age on the street with their friends. But as seasons go by, young girls are getting more experience with a ball, playing with their friends, playing in the park, playing in schools, and so the level's increasing. So it links to a couple of the points that have been made, where the credibility for the female game is rising because players are getting better, because they're being more exposed to football, both on the television, in the street, in school. It's an option for young girls to play football now. It's not, oh, I'm going to play with the boys. And like the exposure that the women's game's getting is massive. Like Joe Public are watching, are seeing it as normal. It becomes aspirational for young girls, and so it's certainly on the rise. There's still a lot of work to do, a lot of progress to be made, but people are seeing now that, like, why not? Like, female practitioners, female athletes are good, very talented, very well educated. But why not?
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue the female football game is better than the males, but but then maybe I'm biased, but why not? I was a footballer as a young teenager as well. I think it's interesting as well, because I think brands can hold sport to account as well. Like, you've just talked about the Danone example. I know PepsiCo have got involved with sponsoring the Champions League. And why is the Champions League called the Champions League and then the Women's Champions League? Why can't we have the Men's Champions League and the Women's Champions? And it's noticing these things and calling them out and using our clout to kind of hold account the system that we just take for granted, some of these norms. And I do think there's that intention that you said at that higher level, but also that sort of grassroots up change. And Claire, I was really interested in, like, when you talked about the Wickes group and you talked about that group of women who came together and challenged the business. And will you share a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so in Wickes, we think it's really important to hear what our colleagues are thinking and how they want to drive change in our business. So we hold situations called fish bowls. So in a non-COVID environment, we would have our board sat round in a horseshoe, and in the centre of that, we would bring a circle of colleagues through. And we've done this for all of our different diversity and inclusion groups. So whether it be LGBT+ or our BAME group, we started with our female group, and we heard just what's real life experience from colleagues who are women within Wickes, which is a hugely male orientated environment, from our trade business to our DIY business, much less so in our showroom. It's more balanced there. But we got to hear what our colleagues' real life examples were, and some of it just wasn't good enough. So that happened. Our first female fishbowl was in 2016, and we made a really big step on there. And I think one of the big things was the board couldn't defend what they heard. They couldn't intervene. They just had to listen and take it at face value for what it was. And I remember one of our board directors leaving that session and saying at the time, he had a daughter and a son, and his daughter was such a hard worker. She did everything right. And his son was, he just had life really easy. He didn't have to work that hard at school. He was really smart. Things just came quite easily to him. And it devastated him that when his daughter got into the workplace, she might be less successful or have a more difficult time just because she's a female, and that his son might be more successful when he hasn't really worked as hard or wanted it as badly. So he made a pledge at that time that he was going to do everything he could for females in our business to ensure that they would have fair and equal opportunities, regardless of what their gender was. And he stood by that really strongly. He took it to our leadership teams. He was really open with it. He told his story about what he heard and what it meant to him personally. And we found more and more people joining in with that. It was something our board lived by. Our colleagues drove the changes and what they wanted to see change, and our board backed it 100%. So it meant that our leadership teams were kind of sandwiched in the middle. They just went along with it, and the change shifted really quickly. And where we've got to now, so our first one was 2016. We've just had a second one, and that group's evolved. So it's now called the Balance for Better group, and it looks at the balance of getting it right for equality for all genders. And we found that actually, while Wickes has made a huge shift, and we're really proud of where our colleagues have come from, now we're still seeing gender bias from our suppliers. So that group are working towards how can we challenge our suppliers back to hold them to the same standards that we held our Wickes colleagues to all those years ago. So we're starting to evolve that change and really work with those businesses to say, what policies do you have in place? How are you championing different genders in your business? And where there is any discrimination or bias, how are we pushing back on that to say it's not acceptable and it's not something we'll tolerate as a business?
And it's interesting because that sort of brings me to this idea of this, the challenge for women to speak up. And often, we're told actually, it's really important to challenge and speak up, but sometimes there can be that backlash, and even a lot of the research shows that backlash can actually get in the way of holding women back. But in the right circumstances, when you've got to create an environment where people feel safe to challenge and feel that there's a real sense of belonging, then it's a really positive environment. I know the the research around, I know you come across the case study around Heidi and Howard. So you share this case study of a really successful business venture led by Howard, and everyone likes Howard and thinks he's competent. The same case study led by Heidi, and she's either liked or she's competent, one or the other. So how do we go about really, I suppose, helping people to lean in but do it safely? I don't know, Nick, have you got some sort of advice around how to powerfully challenge but do it in a way that maybe doesn't have that sense of backlash?
I think we have to accept that there will be backlashes. So I think it's what Clara was saying before, resilience is very important. And just accepting, yes, that there will be people which will try to patronize you, will try to say that you are aggressive if you are assertive, will try to say that it's just a different norm of expectation from the behavior point of view from female and men, which is still, you see it in many instances. Luckily, it's changing and less so. And I think the new generation of the leaders is coming, which is a lot more open and is a lot more just accepting that, yes, we are different, but we all have the same ambition and we all have the same rights to have those ambitions. And therefore, and we work to achieve them. But in my view, that when you come across, it's probably as a female, it's probably best thing to do is to call it out and in a moment. And it just reminds me many years ago, so many times it happened that, and I have a very soft voice, so when I cannot speak loud. And I was working for a company where everyone was super loud and it was a very male dominated room. So I would say something and they would just ignore. 5 minutes later, the same thing would be said by another man and they would just say, yeah. So on a third time, I just stood up and I said, I'm sorry, but he's just repeating. What is it? Is it like the norm you're accepting? And if you didn't hear what I say, you should have asked me to speak louder, which I know is my development need, but you can't just ignore. And, it's just changed the dynamics in the room. But it was many years ago. I was much younger and it took me courage. And I think that courage is important and calling out and standing for yourself when you feel like you are being walked over or spoken over, or you are not given this chance to be heard and to make an impact. If you have something real to contribute, then I think it's important to have this strength and this confidence in yourself and to call it out. And what's important for the sponsor in the room, because if I had a sponsor in the room, I'm sure that he or she would do it for me, and therefore I would feel a lot more comfortable. And generally, now that I'm much more senior and much more experienced, if I see this happening to a man or woman, doesn't matter, to a more junior colleague, I just step in and I call it out, because it's just far too easy to ignore people which have a thing to say if they are not persistent enough and if they are not at a seniority level where you would listen no matter what they say.
It's brilliant. There's a great book, Good Guys, which is all about allyship, and they've got a glossary of terms, and one of them is heap-eating. So instead of repeating, like they've just repeated what the woman has said. But now all of a sudden it's a great idea. What else they have? They manels, which is all male panels, and actually calling these things out. What? No women? How come? I sent an article. I sent an email to a hockey site last week where they had a whole lot of events that you could join up, webinars, and of the 7 things that you could join, there was one token woman in there, and she was looking at youth sport rather than, hard-hitting tech world, technical, tactical, high performance. So I wrote an email, and, the email came back and said, well, I've picked the best people. I mean, there's just not enough women out there. And I'm like, there's loads of women out there, but it's this idea that merit-based is okay, when actually we know if it's not just about merit. We've got to really reflect on the systems at play. And I'm thinking from your point, James, when you think about, you know, moving beyond just merit to the systems at play, and how do we move, you know, there's a scale of people being unaware to around allyship and really supporting, to actually being a true advocate, not just being aware, but where you go and you positively look to make a difference on a regular basis. What advice would you give to, you know, people in your position, men in your position who are these decision makers around allyship, and maybe calling some of these out and changing their radar to notice?
Well, there's this piece around like awareness and education, isn't there? And awareness of how you might be biased yourself to the decisions that you're making. So innocently for some people, if you're not aware, you're not aware. You know, you make decisions and you go on, and that can happen. So there's obviously a big piece around making others aware. Like if you're fortunate enough to have a greater level of awareness, a greater level of education in a particular area, then it's important that you share your views and you share what is important with others. I think the point around empowering people and creating a space for people to speak up and say what they feel and say what they experience is critical. Certainly raising a daughter, I know that I'd want my daughter to grow up to be able to say how she feels and challenge. And sometimes it takes you to shake an environment a little bit and sort of turn the mirror on people for them to see how they're contributing or not. So for me, the big piece is sharing, it's awareness, it's educating people as to like how bias can affect your decision making, but at the same time, there's also a balance there in terms of again the point's been made, and it's a great point that it's not balancing the books for the sake of balancing the books. It's genuinely giving people that are talented and are capable an opportunity to do what they want, what they can and desire doing.
Yeah, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not everywhere. And I think as soon as we recognize that, we start thinking differently about the environments that we're in. And Claire, when you think about the sort of drive that you have around creating this inclusive environment, what are you doing to make the environment feel more inclusive? Because ultimately, that's where people feel they belong and they can be their best when they have a sense of belonging.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of everything. So the good thing about us is we have our employee network groups, and they have an opportunity to build their own plan for the year. So they describe what it is they want to do. They'll survey their colleagues. They'll come to the board and say, this is what we want to affect change in this year. And it is about not just celebration and education, but how they're going to affect change. So the most recent example is they came back to us and said, we've got a great level of colleagues entering our business now from a balanced gender perspective. So we've got a good level of female colleagues at junior level as well as male. But there's a barrier that's stopping them from getting to senior leadership, and partly it's around poor family leave policy. So there's not enough pay there for a maternity perspective. There wasn't enough support back into the workplace when they wanted to return, and that's where we saw people leaving our business. Our colleagues told us what that needed to change and what that needed to look like. We've put miscarriage support in, we've put IVF support in, all of the things that are a real challenge for female colleagues and that can damage their confidence and their career progression. And we've affected that change. So they drove the board on those changes. They've been implemented this week. They help drive us on things like our flexible working policy. So they've said, you know, you tell us we've got all these opportunities, but actually it's not that flexible. There's as many opportunities at a senior level than we would want to, not enough job sharing, all of that kind of stuff. So they're helping drive what does a great role look like for a senior person, what is the balance that someone needs, what are the barriers that are in people's way, and then they're helping us as a HR team shape our business.
Brilliant. And Nigyar, when we talked earlier, you said the starting point should be inclusion. Can you bring that to life a little bit more?
Yes, I was just reflecting that it's so true that in order to make the real difference in the company, you need to empower people and to shape the agenda. You can create conditions for people to shape the agenda. You can't actually do it for them. And within Danone, there is a very interesting process, which is called one person, one voice, one share. So every single employee of Danone is a shareholder. We all have share, every single one, at least one share, which makes us eligible to vote for the future of the company. And there is a process which collects this in a very structured way, collects the feedback of people and their ideas on the future of the company, including their inclusion and diversity. And then there are people which are championing diversity by region, by country, and they also are a lot more vocal in what's needed in a particular country, because we have to keep in mind that the starting point globally are very different depending on which country you operate, and therefore the needs of people are also very different. And who are we in the headquarters to know better than people in the countries? They know it much better and they can shape it, and therefore our job would be to create conditions and to support them to do it. So that works really well. And but obviously there are common themes among the countries, and the one common theme which is very pronounced is that before we can start talking about diversity, we need to talk about inclusion. Inclusion when every single person feels safe to be him or herself, and not trying to, even in the company with a very strong corporate culture, and I shared with you, Sarah, I worked for Mars and now I'm working for Danone, both companies very known for the hugely powerful company cultures. Within these company cultures, still accepting individuality of people and valuing what we bring individually, and not trying to shape us to the specific mold to fit the expectation of the company culture. And again, talking about the recent examples from Danone is, the matrix which we are looking at as a leadership team. They're not only about gender. They are also focusing on the age, because diversity comes with the age experience, and having older people as well as younger people is very important, and creating conditions that will benefit from the experience and from the energy on different levels of the organization. Then, well, they tell me that it used to be a very French company. I do not experience it, because since I joined, it's a very international company. Yes, they occasionally switch to French language when wine comes to the table, but it's a very international. And again, there is a matrix which we are tracking on the number of nationalities, which would represent the mix in the country or the region we operate. So definitely it's above and beyond diversity. It's inclusion, and it's creating conditions for each one of us to be successful and to fulfill our dreams and ambitions, no matter what's our background, cultural or religious, or of who we are, to be at our best.
When you think about, I know we talked also about the idea of quotas and their need, and I know, for instance, at the moment, UK sport are putting a big focus on women in coaching at the next Olympics, because at the moment, just about 10% of women at the Olympics, coaches at the Olympics are women, whereas they're looking to aim to get to like 25%. And we talk a lot about, yes, we need to move beyond quotas, but where do we feel like these sort of targets are helpful? I just maybe open up that to the floor, and who'd like to jump in?
I think for Wickes, in the very early days, we didn't put a quota or a target as such. We just put an ambition around having balanced shortlists. And we realised really quickly it wasn't enough. So we went out, we're really specific with our managers. We want a balanced shortlist for gender. We want both male and female representation from candidates. We did it. We had lots of ladies that applied, did lots of interviews, definitely were the most best suited people for the job. But when we were making offers, they were rejecting us, and we couldn't quite understand why. So we really pushed back and asked why, and to try and understand. And we realised that during the interview process, we weren't talking about our balanced culture. We weren't talking about the opportunities that we have for women, or what we do around our business, or the policies that apply to them. We were interviewing them with all male panels, and we weren't necessarily representing our business in the best light. So we made a number of different challenges. We made sure that there was always a balanced panel, or that they would at least see a male or a female as part of that. When our offices would open, we'd normally do a tour around the office so that candidates could see that actually we were much more representative. We reviewed our media, those sorts of things, to make sure that we didn't have language in our adverts that were steered more one way than the other. We made sure that our website, etc., had a visibility of everybody that works in our business, whether it be different age groups, different races, different genders. So there were other steps we had to take to really encourage women to come and work for us. So I think quotas have a place to drive a change and to open a door, but there's more that has to be done than just putting a number behind it.
Okay, I think I'll build on what Clara was saying, because again, I shared with you, Sarah, that all my life, initially in my early life in my career, I was actually pushing back on quotas. And the reason why I was so against quotas, because I wanted to know that when I get promoted, I am promoted because I was the best person for the job, not because I happen to be a female. And to me, it was a contradiction, and I was feeling very, very strongly against quotas, until the moment I realized that whether we want it or not, we all have unconscious biases, and our unconscious biases make us look for people which are just like us. Until the moment in the decision-making group there is a real balance, there needs to be a quota, which creates a kind of external pressure, at least to ask yourself a question: have I given the best chance to the most diverse talent to be even considered for this job? And then you make the choice. So I'm with Claire on saying that quota is not enough, but definitely it helps at least to create this tension and to raise the awareness that we are giving, creating the best conditions for the most diverse talent.
It's not going to change on its own, is it? We need to drive that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting when you look at gender inclusion programs. If you have men as allies involved, the research shows that something like it's 96% more possible of making impact and progress, rather than a women-only drive, where it's something like 30% of progress. So I'm going to pass this to you, James. What is it we can do to create more men as allies, like yourself? How can we make them more comfortable, bring more on the journey with us?
Well, like, I suppose there's a piece around recognising that it doesn't weaken you as a male, or weaken you as a male leader, by providing a balanced voice, and by challenging some potentially long-standing culture. I think there's a responsibility for people in position of leadership and power to open the door, and that a responsibility of being in a position of leadership is to ensure that you maximise others, and you help others be the best they can be. So like, I think it's this piece about creating an inclusive culture and creating an inclusive environment. And there is a responsibility on all leaders, but certainly male leaders in a position of power, to open the door and to sort of create opportunity.
a quote here from Ariana Huffington from her work that she does with her platform Thrive, and I'll just read it out, and I'd love then to get you guys to respond to this. So it says, instead of dreaming of 50-50 representation in a suboptimal system, why don't we envision and build a new and better one? And in this new and better one, not just women, not just people from different, minority backgrounds will flourish, everyone will flourish, men and women. So if you had a magic wand to create this optimal system, let's not just try and fix this, but actually create the optimal. What would that look and feel like to you? I'm going to pass that over. Who'd like to go first?
Okay, I'll try to go. Well, first, it will feel great if there is an optimal system where everyone feels included and valued and given a chance to be the best we can be. It's a great system. It's a world, hopefully it's not utopia, hopefully it's a world of the future. And if I bring it to the company environment, I think understanding what are the most difficult pain points for minorities or for female, it's an important element, and then trying to address those pain points. Again, within Danone, we did this work, and one of the most important elements came, as Claire was mentioning, it came the maternity leave. And being able to take long enough maternity leave and to come back and to have guaranteed job was a very important element, while females were feeling they are caught and they are they don't have the same advantage. So introducing equal rights paternity leave was actually changing a lot. And guess what? Fathers are equally happy to spend time with their babies and sharing the load, not just helping mothers in the first few months. And more and more families are not the traditional man and wife, and giving this chance to really enjoy in the formative months is very, very important. And we saw the far greater retention rates and far greater actually return of female back to company, and really stronger retention rates among men as well. So this is one dimension. Then what we are also doing a lot, because a lot of women, after they come from maternity leave, they still want to carry on with the breastfeeding. And we, as a company which produces instant milk formula for babies, we know best, better than anyone, how important the breastfeeding is for the shaping the foundations of the health of children. And so the company policy started by supporting women to carry on with the breastfeeding while you are back to work. So this is also the consultations, really training on the pumping, creating rooms which are, it's really, if as a woman, if you ever pumped in the toilet, this is not the most enjoyable experience. So creating those rooms, creating opportunities to bring your baby, that was all again changing the way people were thinking and people were reacting to this, to this policy introduction. And I think this is just a couple of examples which were addressing the pain points of females coming back to their work after they had the babies. But I'm sure that if we were to ask different groups of employees, they would have a different pain points, and trying to address all of them would eventually create a new environment which would be much better and where everyone would be included.
Well, I think there's so much research now as well to show what works. And actually there's a great book called Gender Equality by Design by Bonnet, which really, it's exactly all of those interventions that we could put in place that change the workplace so that everyone can flourish, everyone can thrive in this environment. So James, that question to you, what is the optimal system, this future that we want to create together? What does it look and feel like to you?
Well, certainly just continuing the piece there around there's creating opportunities for mothers to go back to work, and decreasing the burden of childcare for working mums. But that's obviously a big issue, and something I think that would go a long way is to helping working mums get back into work, is having the option to get back into work. And I can also attest to the point around, as a young father, when we had our children, there was like huge pressure on my partner to be at home with the kids, and as a father, getting the minimal amount of time to be at home and to share the load and to help out is really a challenge and a barrier, and perhaps there's more we could do in an ideal world to create a little bit more balance there. For me, it's genuinely like, could we get to a place where talent is talent, and
yeah, I think that idea that Claira, you talked about earlier, is not just about celebrating, educate, but there's action to really create that change. But what does this optimal system look like for you?
So I was just going to jump on James's point about that education and celebration. I think it's really important to share experiences. So we've definitely tried that when we look at diversity and inclusion across our whole business. Even if I think to our ability work stream, which looks at those with disabilities and long-term health conditions, we've really tried to educate the business on what that looks like, whether it be something that's gender related like menopause, or whether it be something else that someone's experiencing, because we all have health, we all have mental health, we all have health, and it's something to help people understand the impact and how to support someone that's going through that journey. I think when it comes to creating an environment where it's got that optimal balance for everyone, we use ally programs a lot. So if I think about our LGBT plus team, they've created an allyship program that goes out. Anyone can take part in it across the whole business, but we do encourage our management teams to go through the allyship program. Part of it is about understanding the challenge that LGBT plus people go through, understanding what the environment's like for them, understanding why there's still a need for allies within the UK and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. It gives them an understanding of the culture in itself, so understanding language and what is acceptable to say and what isn't acceptable to say, because I think there can be a big fear of getting it wrong, which causes people to hold themselves back to really backing different areas. So that there'll be men in society that are scared to back a woman because they might offend them, or they might say the wrong thing. Are they a feminist? Are they not? Do they say the right thing? Do they actually degrade them by trying to stand up for them? And it prevents them from wanting to push forward and really support that person. It's the same with LGBT plus, it's the same with race. It's that fear of getting it wrong sometimes that stops people from driving forward. So with our ally programs, we try to address those fears in the room and give people the confidence to say, you're doing it for the right reason, so here are the tools to be able to get it right, and here's the education and the understanding that you need. And our ally programs are completely backed by our board. All of our work streams have a board sponsor. They get guidance, they get backing. Anything that we're going to run through the business, we take our board through first, so that we challenge right at the very top and we get their backing and their sponsorship. So I think to get that utopia, you absolutely can, but sometimes you need to realise that it's not always malicious, and that sometimes it's just the fear of getting it wrong. So the more we can help people on that journey, the better.
I think we've had a great conversation around harnessing the power of advocacy. I could talk about this all night long, preferably with a glass of wine in my hand, but that's another for another time. But if you had sort of one key takeaway or one key reflection from our conversation around harnessing the power of advocacy, what would your key takeaway, key reflection be? I'm going to pass it to James first.
Okay. So I suppose I'll walk away asking myself the question, what can be put in place? What systems or processes, what questions can we ask ourselves to challenge our biases and challenge our current perspective?
Brilliant, thank you. And Nigyar?
Key takeaway, it's a very important conversation, and we need to keep it on top of the agenda of leadership teams, of the boards, and we need to hold ourselves to account to really progress and accept that we will not be able to solve all the pain points in one go, but every step on this journey matters.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think my key takeaway is to go back and reflect and see, are we doing enough? And if so, are we challenging ourselves hard enough to really make a change? And if so, where are we not doing enough and what more can we be doing? So to learn from other businesses, to see what the shape is in society, and to push ourselves that bit further. I know that we shy away from certain business areas, for example, because they're male dominated. Are we doing enough there? Do we need to go back and push ourselves to put apprenticeships in those areas that are steered towards women, to encourage people to go into those fields in the future? For me, it's the challenge to say, have we risen to the challenge?
Brilliant, what a great line to finish it on. I mean, my key takeaway reflection is I feel inspired by all of you and what you're doing and the impact that you're making, and I feel confident that we can move forward and continue to make a difference in this area. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time. It's been a great conversation.